that they don't ask any more questions. But, okay, so what I want to do now, just to start, right, because we'll do a lot of background today, is I'm going to have, it's 2 lines, right, and they're going to converge, right. One line is going to be some themes in French philosophy over the 20th century and how they led to Deleuze. That's the one side, right? The other side is going to go through psychology, right? And this is the side you're going to be really familiar with, right? It's going to talk about critique of identities, and they're going to converge on Deleuze and Foucault, right? And from there, then we'll talk a little bit about what Foucault was on about, right? Because that will allow us to contrast Deleuze with Foucault, and I know that there's some background with Foucault, I mean, with some of his ideas, all right, even if it's not with the text. Right? So we'll do all that, right? And then whatever time we have left, I'll give you a little background on what Deleuze is doing in difference and repetition, right? What the broad project is, and that should at least set you off, right, for the reading, right, for next time. Okay. Okay, so let's start. And also, before I forget, the people who've been with me before know that people raise their hands and ask questions all the time, or they challenge, or they say, "You just said that, I don't understand it." And so jump in. At some point, I think if we want, we'll get into groups and people can talk for a little bit and then come back, because that gives you a little time to do some Danish as well. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. So the first line. And a question.
No.
Okay.
She's scratching.
Okay. Just kidding. Okay. Right. There is no non-dangerous movements in any of my classes.
No scratching or anything.
Keep your hands where I can see them. Okay. 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 Todd, focus. Okay. The first line, right, I want to run through is the philosophical line. Okay. And what I want to do is talk about 3 stages in the history of 20th century philosophy. The third stage of which is going to involve Foucault and Deleuze. But that third stage really emerges as a dialogue with the first and second stage I'm going to talk about. And it's not uncommon in French and particularly German philosophy for people to see themselves as writing out of a tradition, and therefore, right, always in dialogue with the people who came before them. So to have some of the themes of what came before will help us see what's going on when Deleuze starts to write. Okay. Okay. So the first place I'm going to start, right, is the mid-century movement that all of you have heard of existentialism, right? So, and existentialism. Really, we're thinking about the 1940s to 50s, right? Is the heyday of existentialism. So it started a little bit earlier. It continued on into the 60s, but its most influential period was from the early 40s to the mid 50s. Right? And existentialism. Oh, actually, no. Let me ask: how many people here have studied some existentialism? Some, yeah, okay. So let me say a little, because a lot of people not so much. The existentialism was a view that privileged the perspective of, we could say, the individual subject, the individual person. People who've heard of existentialism always hear about the idea, well, existentialists believe there's no meaning in anything, and you make up your own meaning and things, which is, by the way, not false, right? Sartre particularly said, look, God, there's no God, we've realized this, that means we're here, we just make up the meaning of our lives as we go along, right? But to make up the meaning of one's life is an individual project, right? I do this. So it's as though for the existentialist, each of us is ultimately the author of his or her own life. They're ultimately the author of his or her values. And in some way, what that does is removes people from the influences of society. And Sartre said, society can influence people as it likes, but ultimately you're free to make any choices you want. It's ultimately all up to you. And that's where that focus on the individual comes in. Now, this was reacted against by the next generation that came, and this would be the structuralists. And now we're talking, they're hating probably the 60s. So the structuralists argued that people are mostly, who we are is mostly a product of the structures we find ourselves in. So it shifts from one side to the other. Instead of the free individual who creates meaning, now the individual is more created by something that they themselves do not control. And different structuralists gave different accounts of how this occurs. So you have the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan saying we are a product of our unconscious, the structures of our unconscious. That's who we are. There was an anthropologist, Levi-Strauss, said we're the product of fundamental kinship structures. The Marxists, Louis Althusser, said we're the product of the economic arrangements. But for all of these...
After Lacan you mentioned, who, say it once more.
Yeah.
After Lacan you mentioned.
Let me write this down. Okay. He's the anthropologist Levi-Strauss.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And part of this, and I don't know if people even still study psychology. Piaget? Do people study Piaget? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, Piaget was, in essence, a structuralist. There's a difference between Piaget and the others. The others often went back to a linguist, an early 20th century linguist Saussure, and drew from him. Piaget did, but Piaget's idea of there are certain structures of human consciousness, one which follows the other, right? Very similar. So you see what's happening here is that from the movement that says we are ultimately individuals responsible for ourselves, freely choosing who we are, it flips over, right? And now who are we? We are the product of, whatever structures, right? Structures of the unconscious, structures of the economy, structures of kinship, but we are a product of something rather than the creator. But all of the structuralists, what they had in common was that each of them thought we were the product, more or less, of a particular structure. So there was something for each of them that was the key to our identity, the key to who we are. They disagreed about what that thing is. But they all believed that it was a thing. We could put it another way. Right? That there is an identity, often outside our conscious awareness, that forms who we are. A thing. They might not agree what it was, but they all agreed there was something. And here is where the group often called, right, the post-structuralists. Got it. Now, the term post-structuralist is a bit of a strange one, because on one hand, it seems a bit like it's just a chronological mark, right? Who are the post-structuralists? The people who came after the structuralists, right? It seems... And that's not, again, there's something to that. Right? But the people who usually get grouped, and particularly around narrative work, they get grouped as post-structuralists, all do have something in common, which is a critique of the idea. Now, Charlotte, I'm going to come back to what you said, right, when you were introducing yourself, right, of identities, right, that there's a identity to which we are reducible somehow. So, where Althusser said we are reducible to the structure, to an effect of the structure of the economy, right? Where Lacan said we are reducible to the way the signifiers in our unconscious work, right? What all the post-structurists denied was, I could put it this way, that reducibility, that we're reducible to this particular thing.
So they say there is an identity which is not reducible to this. Is that what you say? They deny.
Yeah. Let me go down. Let me put it this way, right? That whatever identities we seem to have, they're not reducible to some essential character that we are, right? We aren't essentially products of our unconscious, or products of the economy, right? Or products of kinship structures. So in that sense, post-structuralism as it's taken up, particularly in narrative practice, is a critique of the idea of identity, right? As that not that there aren't identities. I mean, sure, right? There are identities. I mean, there's tables and chairs and stuff, but that those identities are essential, right, to what that thing is. Now, that's where Foucault and Deleuze take up, okay? I'm going to come back to them, right? But I want to put them on hold for a minute, right? And swing over to the other side and talk about psychology. Right? And then we'll see the convergence on Foucault and Deleuze. Because one way to think about narrative work is as a critique of the psychology of identity. Much of the history of psychology, now I'm going to tell you things you know, I'm just going to tell them to you from an angle that I think will help us see what's going on here, is taken up by trying to give an answer to the question, what are human beings essentially like? What are their psyches essentially like?